Marcus Wellington never thought he would return to the mansion where he grew up. After 15 years of building his business empire in New York, the billionaire had received an urgent call from his family lawyer. His father had passed away, leaving behind a will that required Marcus to personally handle the estate matters. The massive iron gates of Wellington Manor creaked open as his black sedan rolled up the familiar driveway. The three-story Victorian mansion looked exactly as he remembered it, with its towering white columns and perfectly manicured gardens. But something felt different as Marcus stepped out of the car. The silence was heavier, more oppressive than the peaceful quiet he remembered from his childhood summers here. Mrs. Chen, the elderly housekeeper, greeted him at the front door with tears in her eyes. She had worked for the Wellington family for over 30 years and had watched Marcus grow from a rebellious teenager into the successful businessman he had become. "Master Marcus, I'm so sorry about your father," she said, wringing her hands nervously. "There are some things you need to know about the house, about what's been happening here." Marcus barely listened as he walked through the familiar hallways. His mind focused on completing the legal paperwork and selling the property as quickly as possible. He had no intention of keeping the family home. Too many painful memories lived within these walls, and his life was in New York now. As he climbed the grand staircase to his father's study, Marcus noticed something that made him pause. Children's toys were scattered on the landing above, colorful blocks, a small red tricycle, and what looked like drawings taped to the wall. This was strange because his father had lived alone for the past decade, ever since Marcus's mother had died. "Mrs. Chen," he called down the stairs, "whose toys are these?" The elderly woman appeared at the bottom of the staircase, her face pale. "Sir, that's what I need to tell you about. There are children living here, 2 little ones about 4 years old." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Had his father remarried without telling him? Was there a stepmother he didn't know about? The old man had always been secretive, but this seemed impossible to hide. "Where are they now?" Marcus asked, walking back down the stairs. "They're in the garden with Rosa," Mrs. Chen replied quietly. "She's been taking care of them since they were babies." "Rosa? Who's Rosa?" Mrs. Chen's hands trembled as she spoke. "She's the woman your father hired to help around the house about 5 years ago. A lovely young lady from Honduras. She does the cleaning and cooking, and she's been caring for the children." Marcus felt confusion mixing with anger. Why hadn't anyone told him about these children? Were they his father's? The thought made him feel sick. His father had been 68 when he died, which would have made him in his early 60s when these children were born. He walked toward the back of the house, following the sound of children's laughter that drifted through the open French doors. The garden looked beautiful in the afternoon sunlight, with roses blooming along the stone pathways and a small playground that definitely hadn't been there during his childhood. That's when he saw her. Rosa was kneeling on a blanket spread under the old oak tree, helping 2 identical little boys build something with wooden blocks. She was younger than Marcus had expected, probably in her late 20s, with long, dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore a plain blue dress and had the kind of natural beauty that didn't need makeup or fancy clothes. But it was the children that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. The 2 boys looked exactly like each other, with light brown skin, curly dark hair, and the most striking green eyes Marcus had ever seen. They were beautiful children, clearly well cared for and happy as they played with their blocks and chattered to Rosa in a mixture of English and Spanish. As Marcus stood watching from the doorway, one of the boys looked up and saw him. The child stared for a long moment, then tugged on Rosa's dress. "Mama Rosa, ¿quién es?" the little boy asked, pointing at Marcus. Rosa turned to see what the child was looking at, and her face immediately changed. The relaxed smile disappeared, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. She quickly stood up, brushing grass from her dress, and took both children by the hand. "Come on, boys," she said softly. "Let's go inside and get some juice." But Marcus was already walking across the garden toward them. He needed answers, and he needed them now. "Wait," he called out. "Please, I just want to talk." Rosa stopped but didn't turn around. Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders as she held tightly to both children's hands. "You must be Marcus Wellington," she said in accented but perfect English. "Mrs. Chen told me you were coming today." "And you're Rosa," Marcus replied, studying her face as she finally turned to look at him. "I think we need to have a conversation about these children." One of the little boys was staring up at Marcus with obvious curiosity. while the other had moved to hide partially behind Rosa's dress. Marcus felt something strange happening in his chest as he looked at them. A protective instinct he didn't understand. "What are their names?" he asked gently, crouching down to be at the children's eye level. "This is Diego," Rosa said, indicating the bolder of the two boys, "and this is Daniel." She placed her hand protectively on the shy child's head. "Diego and Daniel," Marcus repeated, and both boys smiled at hearing their names. "How old are you guys?" "Cuatro," Diego said proudly, holding up 4 fingers. "We're 4. Daniel whispered something in Spanish to Rosa, who nodded and translated. "He wants to know if you're the man in the pictures upstairs." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. "What pictures?" Rosa's cheeks flushed red. "Your father. He had photographs of you in his study. The boys have seen them many times. Daniel thinks you look familiar." The pieces of this puzzle were starting to form a picture that Marcus didn't want to see. These children lived in his father's house called Rosa Mama, and apparently knew who he was from photographs. But the most disturbing part was something he couldn't ignore any longer. Looking at Diego and Daniel's faces, Marcus could see features that looked hauntingly familiar. The shape of their eyes, the way Diego smiled with one corner of his mouth higher than the other, even the stubborn cowlick in Daniel's curly hair. These were all traits Marcus recognized from his own childhood photographs. The afternoon sun seemed to dim as the terrible possibility began to take shape in his mind. Marcus couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his old bedroom, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what he had discovered. Rosa had quickly taken the children inside after their brief meeting in the garden, and despite his attempts to find her later in the evening, she seemed to be avoiding him. Mrs. Chen had prepared his father's study for him to go through the legal documents, but Marcus found himself distracted by the family photographs Rosa had mentioned. Sure enough, there were several framed pictures of Marcus at different ages scattered around the room. His high school graduation, his college years, even some recent newspaper clippings about his business success. But what caught his attention were the newer additions to the collection. Tucked between the older frames were dozens of photographs of Diego and Daniel. Pictures of them as babies, learning to walk, playing in the garden, celebrating birthdays with small parties. In many of the photos, Marcus could see Rosa in the background, always watching over the boys with the careful attention of a devoted mother. The most unsettling discovery was a photo album hidden in his father's desk drawer. Page after page showed the twins growing from infants into the 4-year-olds he had met today. But it was the first page that made Marcus's hands shake. There, in his father's careful handwriting, was a note. "My grandsons, Diego and Daniel Wellington, born March 15th. They have their father's eyes." Marcus stared at the words until they blurred. His father's eyes? Or his father's father's eyes? The green eyes that had been in the Wellington family for generations. The next morning, Marcus was determined to get answers. He found Rosa in the kitchen, preparing breakfast while the twins sat at a small table eating cereal. Both boys brightened when they saw him, which surprised Marcus. Children were usually shy around strangers, but Diego and Daniel seemed to accept his presence easily. "Buenos dias, Señor Marcus," Diego said proudly, showing off his Spanish. "Good morning, Diego," Marcus replied, then looked at Rosa. "We need to talk." Rosa's face tightened, but she nodded. "Boys, why don't you go play in the living room?" "I'll be there in a few minutes." After the children left, Marcus sat down at the kitchen table. "Rosa, I found some things in my father's study last night. Photos of the boys and a note calling them his grandsons." Rosa turned away from him, busying herself with washing the breakfast dishes. "Your father was a good man. He loved those children very much." "That doesn't answer my question," Marcus said firmly. "Are Diego and Daniel my father's children? Or are they mine?" The plate Rosa was holding slipped from her hands and shattered on the floor. She stared down at the broken pieces for a long moment before answering. "I don't know what you mean," she whispered. Marcus stood up and moved closer to her. "Rosa, please. I need the truth. Those boys have Wellington family features. The green eyes, the facial structure. I can see it clearly now that I know to look for it." Rosa knelt down to pick up the broken plate, her hands shaking. "Señor Wellington, your father, he never said anything to you about us?" "Nothing. I haven't spoken to my father in over 3 years, and before that, our conversations were brief and formal. He never mentioned children or you or anything about his personal life. When Rosa stood up, there were tears in her eyes. He said you were too busy with your important life in New York. He said you wouldn't want to be bothered with family complications. The word complications hit Marcus like a physical blow. So they are family? Before Rosa could answer, Diego came running back into the kitchen. Mama Rosa, Daniel is crying. He says his tummy hurts. Rosa immediately forgot about their conversation and hurried to check on Daniel. Marcus followed, finding the smaller twin curled up on the couch, holding his stomach and whimpering. What's wrong with him? Marcus asked, surprised by how concerned he felt. He gets nervous stomach aches sometimes, Rosa explained, gently rubbing Daniel's back. When there are changes or new people around, it upsets him. Marcus felt a stab of guilt. Had his presence in the house caused this child to feel sick? Is there anything I can do to help? He asked. Rosa looked at him with surprise. You could read to him. Daniel loves stories, and sometimes it helps him relax. Marcus had never read to a child before, but he found himself sitting on the edge of the couch while Rosa handed him a worn picture book. Daniel looked up at him with those familiar green eyes, and Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. Once upon a time, Marcus began reading. There was a brave little rabbit who lived in a big forest. As he read, Daniel gradually stopped crying and curled up closer to Marcus. Diego climbed onto the other side of the couch, listening intently to the story. When Marcus finished the book, both boys asked for another one. For the next hour, Marcus found himself completely absorbed in reading story after story to the twins. They were intelligent, curious children who asked questions about every picture and seemed to hang on every word. Diego was clearly the more outgoing of the two, while Daniel was quieter but equally engaged. When the boys finally ran off to play, Rosa sat down across from Marcus with a cup of coffee. They like you, she said simply. They're good kids, Marcus replied. Rosa, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. She nodded, but he could see the fear in her eyes. 5 years ago, I was here for my mother's funeral. I stayed for about a week, helping my father with the arrangements and dealing with her affairs. Do you remember that time? Rosa's coffee cup trembled in her hands. Yes, I remember. You were working here then? I had just started. Your father hired me a few days before the funeral. He needed extra help with the house and the guests who came for the service. Marcus felt his heart pounding. Rosa, during that week, did something happen between us? The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Rosa set down her coffee cup and covered her face with her hands. I was so young and scared, she whispered. I had just come to this country. I barely spoke English, and I was trying so hard to keep my job. Your father was paying for my immigration lawyer, and I couldn't afford to lose the work. What happened? Marcus asked gently. You were grieving and you were drinking. One night you came to the kitchen where I was working late, cleaning up after all the funeral guests. You were so sad, and you started talking to me about your mother, about how guilty you felt for not being closer to her. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to remember, but that whole week was a blur of grief and alcohol. We talked for hours, Rosa continued. You were kind to me and you treated me like a real person, not just a servant. I had never met anyone like you before, so educated and successful, but also so hurt and lonely. And then? Rosa's voice was barely audible. And then one night it just happened. We were both so sad and lonely and we comforted each other. But in the morning you acted like nothing had occurred. You left for New York the next day and you never said goodbye. The weight of understanding crashed down on Marcus. Diego and Daniel weren't his father's sons. They were his. Marcus sat in stunned silence as Rosa's words sank in. The children playing in the next room weren't just random kids his father had taken in. They were his own sons. The realization hit him like a freight train, bringing with it a mixture of shock, guilt, and an unexpected surge of protective instinct. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice hoarse. Why didn't you contact me when you found out you were pregnant? Rosa wiped tears from her eyes. I tried to. I asked your father for your phone number or address in New York, but he refused to give it to me. He said you had made it clear that you wanted nothing to do with this family or this place. That's not true, Marcus said quickly. I mean, yes, I stayed away because of my own issues with my father. But I never said I wouldn't want to know about something like this. Your father told me you were engaged to some important woman in New York, Rosa continued. He said a scandal involving a pregnant maid would ruin your reputation and your business. He promised to take care of me and the babies if I never contacted you. Marcus felt anger rising in his chest. Even in death, his father was still manipulating people's lives. So you've been raising my children alone for 4 years? Not alone, Rosa said defensively. Your father loved Diego and Daniel like they were his own grandchildren. He made sure they had everything they needed: good food, clothes, toys, medical care. He even started college funds for them. But he never told me they existed. He said it was better that way. He said you had your own life and we had ours. Marcus stood up and began pacing around the kitchen. Everything about his relationship with his father suddenly made sense. The increased distance over the past few years. The reluctance to have long phone conversations. The way the old man had always changed the subject when Marcus asked about his health or his daily life. I need some air, Marcus said abruptly, heading for the back door. He spent the next 2 hours walking around the property, trying to process this life-changing information. He was a father. He had 2 4-year-old sons who had been living just 3 hours away from his New York penthouse, and he had known nothing about them. When he finally returned to the house, he found Rosa in the laundry room, folding small clothes that obviously belonged to the boys. She looked up nervously when he entered. I've been thinking, Marcus said. I want to do DNA tests just to be completely sure. Not because I don't believe you, but because I need to know for certain before I make any major decisions. Rosa nodded. I understand. Your father actually had tests done when the boys were babies. The results are in his desk in the same drawer where you found the photo album. Marcus felt his eyebrows rise. He had paternity tests done? He said he needed to be sure before he made any legal arrangements for the children's future. The results confirmed what I already knew. When Marcus went back to his father's study and found the sealed envelope containing the DNA test results, his hands shook as he opened it. The scientific language was clear. Diego and Daniel Wellington were 99.9% certain to be his biological children. That evening, Marcus sat in the living room watching Rosa help the boys with a puzzle. She was patient and encouraging, praising them when they found the right pieces and gently guiding them when they got frustrated. It was clear that she loved these children deeply, and they adored her in return. Mama Rosa, when is Abuelo coming back? Diego asked, using the Spanish word for grandfather. Rosa's face clouded with sadness. Remember what I told you, mijo? Abuelo went to heaven to be with the angels. He can't come back, but he's watching over us. Is he watching the man who looks like our pictures? Daniel asked, glancing at Marcus. Yes, sweetheart. He's watching all of us. After Rosa put the boys to bed, she and Marcus sat on the back porch listening to the evening sounds of the countryside. What happens now? Rosa asked quietly. I honestly don't know, Marcus admitted. This changes everything. I have a company to run in New York, but I also have children who don't even know I'm their father. They know your family, Rosa said. Diego asked me today if you were their daddy. Children are smarter than adults think they are. What did you tell him? I told him that you were their papa's son, which makes you their family. I said you were here to take care of things now that Abuelo was gone. Marcus looked at her in the moonlight. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was kind and intelligent and devoted to his children. Rosa, I need to ask you something personal. Are you involved with anyone? Romantically, I mean. She shook her head. Your father made it clear that my job was to focus on the children. He didn't approve of me dating while I was caring for them. And honestly, between working and taking care of Diego and Daniel, I haven't had time to think about relationships. So you've been alone all this time raising my children, with no support system except for an old man who was keeping secrets from everyone. It wasn't as bad as you make it sound, Rosa said softly. I love Diego and Daniel more than anything in the world. They've given my life meaning and purpose. Your father was good to us, even if he was secretive about it. But what about your own dreams? Your own life? You're what, 27 years old? You should be dating, maybe thinking about marriage, having your own family. Rosa smiled sadly. Diego and Daniel are my family. They're the only family I need. The next morning, Marcus woke up to the sound of children's laughter outside his window. When he looked out, he saw Rosa and the boys having what appeared to be a water balloon fight in the garden. All 3 of them were soaking wet and laughing hysterically. As he watched them play, Marcus felt something he had never experienced before. A deep, aching desire to be part of that happiness. His life in New York suddenly seemed empty and meaningless compared to the joy he was witnessing in his own backyard. When the water fight ended and Rosa was helping the boys dry off with towels, Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. He was going to stay, not permanently, not without a lot of planning and consideration, but he was going to extend his visit and really get to know his children. He was going to learn what they liked and disliked, what made them laugh, what scared them, what their dreams were for the future, and he was going to figure out how to tell them that he was their father. The thought terrified him, but it also filled him with an excitement he hadn't felt in years. For the first time since building his business empire, Marcus Wellington had found something that mattered more than money and success. He had found his family. Over the next few days, Marcus found himself falling into an unexpected routine. He would wake up early and join Rosa and the boys for breakfast, then spend the morning working on his father's estate paperwork while the children played nearby. In the afternoons, he discovered the pure joy of being completely present with Diego and Daniel. The boys were fascinated by everything about him. They wanted to know about his life in New York, his work, why he wore suits every day, and whether he had any pets. Marcus found himself buying child-appropriate books about business and skyscrapers, trying to explain his world in terms they could understand. "So you build big, big buildings?" Diego asked, his eyes wide with wonder. "Not exactly," Marcus laughed. "I help people buy and sell buildings, and I make sure they have enough money to build new ones." "Like playing with blocks, but with real houses?" Daniel added quietly. "That's actually a pretty good way to think about it." Marcus was amazed by how quickly he adapted to having children around. He found himself automatically cutting his food into smaller pieces at dinner, checking to make sure they washed their hands, and listening carefully for any sounds from their room at night that might indicate they needed something. But it was the small moments that affected him most deeply. The way Diego would unconsciously reach for his hand when they walked through the garden, how Daniel would bring him drawings he had made, usually featuring stick figures that he claimed were Papa Marcus and Mama Rosa and us. The way both boys would curl up against him when he read them bedtime stories, their small warm bodies trusting and relaxed. Rosa watched these interactions with a mixture of happiness and concern. Marcus could tell she was worried about what would happen when he eventually returned to New York. "They're getting attached to you," she warned him one evening as they sat on the porch after putting the boys to bed. "Is that a bad thing?" "It could be, if you're planning to disappear from their lives again." Marcus felt the sting of her words, but he knew she was right to be protective. "I'm not planning to disappear, Rosa. I'm trying to figure out how to make this work." "What does making it work mean to you?" she asked. Because to Diego and Daniel, family isn't something you visit on weekends or holidays. They need stability and consistency. "I know that. I'm looking into options." The truth was, Marcus had already started making major changes to his life in New York. He had assigned most of his daily responsibilities to his business partners and was conducting meetings by video call. His assistant had been fielding questions about his extended absence, but Marcus found that he cared less and less about the minor crises that used to consume his days. The real challenge came when Diego fell off his bicycle and scraped his knee badly. Marcus was in the house when he heard the crying and ran outside to find Daniel trying to comfort his twin, while Rosa examined the injury. "It's okay, mijo," Rosa was saying. "It's just a scrape. We'll clean it up and put a bandage on it." But Diego was inconsolable, sobbing and holding his knee while blood trickled down his leg. Without thinking, Marcus scooped the boy up in his arms. "Hey, buddy, let me see," he said gently. "That looks like it really hurts." Something about Marcus's calm voice and secure embrace seemed to soothe Diego immediately. The little boy wrapped his arms around Marcus's neck and buried his face in his shoulder. "It hurts so much," Diego whimpered. "I know it does. But you know what? I got hurt in that exact same spot when I was your age, right here on this same driveway." Diego pulled back to look at Marcus with interest. "Really? Really? And you want to know something else? Brave boys who get hurt while learning to ride bikes always heal up extra strong." As Rosa cleaned and bandaged the scrape, Marcus distracted Diego with stories about his own childhood accidents and adventures around the property. By the time the bandage was secure, Diego was laughing and eager to try riding his bike again. "Papa Marcus," Diego said as Marcus set him down, "will you teach me how to ride without falling?" The words Papa Marcus hit like a thunderbolt. Marcus glanced at Rosa, who had gone very still. "Diego?" Rosa said carefully. Remember what we talked about? Senor Marcus is— It's okay, Marcus interrupted. He knelt down so he was eye level with both boys. Diego, Daniel, I need to tell you both something important. Rosa's face went pale, but she didn't stop him. You know how you sometimes ask about your daddy, and Mama Rosa tells you that he's far away? Both boys nodded solemnly. Well, the truth is, your daddy isn't far away anymore. I'm your daddy. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Diego and Daniel looked at each other, then at Marcus, then at Rosa. You're our papa? Daniel asked in a whisper. Yes, I am. I'm sorry I wasn't here when you were babies, but I didn't know about you. Abuelo never told me. But you're here now? Diego asked hopefully. I'm here now, and I want to be your papa for real if you want me to be. What happened next was something Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. Both boys threw themselves into his arms simultaneously, nearly knocking him over with their enthusiasm. We wanted a daddy so much, Daniel said, his voice muffled against Marcus's chest. Abuelo said maybe someday we would have one, Diego added. He said our real papa was a good man but very busy. Marcus held his sons tightly, feeling tears he didn't expect running down his cheeks. Over the boys' heads, he saw Rosa wiping her eyes as well. That night, after an extended bedtime routine that included extra stories and lots of questions about what having a daddy would mean for their daily lives, Marcus and Rosa sat in the kitchen with cups of coffee neither of them was drinking. Are you angry with me for telling them? Marcus asked. No, Rosa said slowly. They deserve to know the truth. And honestly, they had already figured most of it out on their own. Diego asked me yesterday if that was why you had the same eyes as them. Rosa, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. She looked at him warily. What if we all moved to New York together? You and the boys. I have a large apartment, and I could get you your own space nearby if you preferred. The boys could go to excellent schools and you could— No, Rosa said firmly. Marcus was taken aback by the immediate rejection. You haven't even heard the full offer. I don't need to. This is Diego and Daniel's home. They know every inch of these gardens. They have their favorite climbing tree. They know which chickens lay the best eggs. Mrs. Chen has been like a grandmother to them. Their whole world is here. But the opportunities in New York— opportunities for what? To become strangers in a city where nobody knows them? To be the poor kids from Honduras living in some rich man's apartment? Marcus felt stung. I'm not some rich man, I'm their father. You've been their father for exactly 1 day, Rosa said quietly. I've been their mother for 4 years. And I'm telling you that uprooting them from everything they know would be traumatic and selfish. They stared at each other across the kitchen table, and Marcus realized they had reached their first real conflict as co-parents. So what do you suggest? He asked. I suggest you decide what's more important, your business empire or your children, because you can't have both, not if you want to be a real father to Diego and Daniel. The challenge in her voice was unmistakable, and Marcus knew that his answer would determine not just his relationship with his sons, but possibly his entire future. Marcus felt a mix of admiration and concern. How much does she send them? About 80% of her salary, Mrs. Chen replied. Her mother has diabetes and needs expensive medication. One brother is in university, and the other is still in high school. Rosa has been their primary support since she came here. This revelation explained so much about Rosa's cautious approach to their situation. She wasn't just responsible for Diego and Daniel. She was supporting an entire family back home. Any disruption to her employment could affect the lives of 5 other people. That evening, Marcus found Rosa in the garden after the boys were asleep, tending to the vegetable patch his father had apparently started for her. Mrs. Chen told me about your family in Honduras, he said gently. Rosa's hands stilled on the tomato plants. I hope you don't think I've been stealing from your father or taking advantage. That's not what I think at all, Marcus interrupted. I think you're incredibly generous and responsible, but I also think you've been carrying too much weight on your shoulders. It's my family. It's my responsibility. And Diego and Daniel are my family, which makes their well-being my responsibility too. Rosa, I want to help support your family in Honduras, not as charity, but as part of our arrangement going forward. Rosa stood up slowly, brushing dirt from her hands. What arrangement? I want to offer you a formal position, not as a maid or housekeeper, but as co-parent to our children. A real partnership with a real salary that reflects the value of what you do. Marcus, I can't accept. Yes, you can, Because this isn't about you accepting my help. This is about me stepping up to be the father my children deserve and the partner you deserve. Rosa stared at him in the moonlight. Partner? Marcus took a deep breath. Rosa, I know this is complicated and I know we're basically strangers who happen to have children together. But over these past 2 weeks I've seen what an incredible mother you are. And what an incredible woman you are. I've also realized that I don't just want to be Diego and Daniel's father. I want to be part of the family you've built. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you're willing, I'd like us to try building something real together. Not just for the boys, but for us. Rosa was quiet for so long that Marcus began to worry he had misread the situation entirely. Marcus, she finally said, you need to understand something. I'm not the same scared girl you met 5 years ago. I've raised 2 children, managed a household, learned a new language, and built a life here. I'm not going to lose myself in gratitude just because you've decided to be a father. I wouldn't want you to, and I'm not going to pretend that what happened between us 5 years ago was some great romance. We were both lonely and grieving, and we made a mistake that happened to create 2 beautiful children. Marcus felt his heart sink, but Rosa wasn't finished. But, she continued, I've also watched you this past week with Diego and Daniel. I've seen how gentle you are with them, how patient, how willing you are to change your entire life for their sake. And I've remembered why I was attracted to you in the first place. Rosa, let me finish. If we're going to try this, we're going to do it slowly and carefully. The boy's stability comes first, always. And if it doesn't work out between us romantically, we still have to be able to co-parent effectively. Marcus nodded. I understand completely. Do you? Because I need to know that you're not going to wake up in 6 months and decide this life is too quiet or too complicated and disappear back to New York. I've already sold my apartment in New York, Marcus said quietly. Rosa's eyes widened. You what? I put it on the market yesterday. I'm also looking into starting a satellite office here in town so I can employ some local people and contribute to the community. Marcus, that's a huge decision. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Diego and Daniel need their father and I need them. And honestly, Rosa, I need you too. The kiss that followed was nothing like their encounter 5 years ago. This was tentative and sweet, full of promise rather than desperation. When they broke apart, Rosa was smiling. The boys are going to be so excited, she said. They've been asking me when you're going to be their real daddy. What did you tell them? I told them that you already are their real daddy. But now you're learning how to be their everyday daddy too. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Marcus realized that he had finally found what he hadn't even known he was looking for. His life in New York had been successful and impressive, but it had also been empty. Here, with Rosa and his children, he felt complete for the first time in his adult life. But there was still one more surprise waiting for him. Spent a sleepless night wrestling with Rosa's ultimatum. By morning, he had made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week ago. He was going to restructure his entire life around his children. The next few days were a whirlwind of phone calls and video conferences. Marcus worked with his business partners to create a plan that would allow him to manage most of his responsibilities remotely. He would need to travel to New York once or twice a month for crucial meetings. But the bulk of his work could be done from anywhere with a reliable internet connection. His assistant was shocked when he explained the situation. Sir, are you sure about this? You've spent 15 years building this company. And now I have something more important to build. Marcus replied. The hardest part was telling his colleagues and clients that his priorities had fundamentally changed. Some were understanding, others were critical. But Marcus found that their opinions mattered less to him than he had expected. Meanwhile, Diego and Daniel were adjusting to having a father with the resilience that only children possess. They peppered him with questions about everything. Why he had lived so far away, whether he would stay forever, if he could teach them to swim in the big pool, and whether they could visit his office in the tall building someday. Papa Marcus, Diego said one morning at breakfast, are you going to marry Mama Rosa now? Rosa choked on her coffee while Marcus felt his face turn red. Why would you ask that, buddy? Because in the stories, when daddies and mommies take care of children together, they get married and live happily ever after. Daniel nodded sagely. And then they have more babies and we would have a little sister. Boys, Rosa said firmly. Real life isn't like storybooks. Papa Marcus and I are friends who both love you very much, but that doesn't mean we're going to get married." Marcus found himself studying Rosa's face as she spoke, wondering if she was being completely honest. Over the past week, he had noticed the way she laughed at his jokes, how she unconsciously touched his arm when she was explaining something about the boys, and the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention. But he also knew that Rosa had every reason to be cautious. He had already abandoned her once, even if unintentionally. She had built a stable life for herself and the children, and trusting him with that security was an enormous leap of faith. The breakthrough came when Daniel got sick with a high fever. Rosa was exhausted from staying up with him for 2 nights, and Marcus insisted on taking over so she could rest. "I don't know if he'll settle down for you," Rosa worried. "He usually only wants me when he's sick." But Daniel seemed to accept Marcus's care naturally. Marcus spent hours holding the feverish child, reading stories in a quiet voice, bringing him sips of water, and gently rubbing his back when the fever made him restless. Around 3 in the morning, Daniel's fever finally broke. As the little boy drifted into peaceful sleep, Marcus realized that something profound had changed inside him. The fierce protective love he felt for his children was unlike anything he had ever experienced. When Rosa woke up and found Marcus asleep in the chair beside Daniel's bed, with his hand still resting protectively on the child's back, she finally began to believe that he might actually stay. "Thank you," she whispered, not wanting to wake either of them. Marcus opened his eyes and smiled at her. "He's better. The fever broke about an hour ago. You didn't have to stay with him all night?" "Yes, I did," Marcus said simply. "He's my son." The look that passed between them in that moment contained years of unspoken feelings and possibilities. A few days later, Mrs. Chen approached Marcus with unexpected news. "Sir, I need to tell you something about Rosa that I think you should know." "What about her?" "She's been sending money to her family in Honduras every month. Nearly everything she earns goes to support her mother and 2 younger brothers. Your father knew about it, and he occasionally gave her extra money for family emergencies, but she's never asked for anything for herself." Marcus. The surprise came the next morning in the form of a phone call from Marcus's father's lawyer. Mr. Harrison had been handling the Wellington family's legal affairs for over 20 years, and his voice was grave when he called. "Marcus, I need you to come to my office today. There are some additional documents your father left that I was instructed not to reveal until you had been at the house for at least 2 weeks." "What kind of documents?" "I'd rather discuss this in person. Can you be here by 2 o'clock? Marcus felt a familiar dread settling in his stomach. Even from beyond the grave, his father apparently had more surprises in store. He arranged for Mrs. Chen to watch the boys while he and Rosa drove to the lawyer's office in town. Rosa had insisted on coming along, sensing that whatever they were about to learn would affect all of them. Mr. Harrison was waiting for them in his oak-paneled office, with a thick manila envelope on his desk. "Marcus, Rosa, please sit down. What I'm about to share with you is going to be difficult to hear." Marcus reached for Rosa's hand as the lawyer opened the envelope. "Your father came to see me about 6 months before he died," Mr. Harrison began. "He was already quite ill, though he hadn't told anyone. He had liver cancer, and the doctors had given him less than a year to live." "He never said anything," Marcus said quietly. "He didn't want you to know. He was afraid you would come home out of obligation rather than choice, but he did want you to understand the decisions he made regarding Rosa and the children." The lawyer pulled out several documents. First, he legally adopted Diego and Daniel as his wards. This gave him the right to make medical and educational decisions for them, and it provided them with legal protection. Rosa gasped. "He never told me about any adoption papers. He wanted to surprise you with the security it provided. But more importantly, Marcus, he set up trust funds for both boys that will provide for their education and living expenses until they turn 25. Marcus felt relief wash over him. Whatever his father's flaws, he had made sure his grandsons would be provided for. "But there's more," Mr. Harrison continued. "He also set up a trust for Rosa." "For me?" Rosa said in shock. "Your father was very specific about this, Marcus. He said that Rosa had sacrificed her youth and independence to raise his grandsons, and that she deserved security in return. The trust will provide her with a monthly income for life, regardless of any other circumstances." Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions. Gratitude that his father had been more thoughtful than he had realized, but also frustration that the old man had continued to make major decisions without consulting anyone. "There's one final document," the lawyer said, pulling out a sealed letter. "Your father wrote this specifically for you, Marcus, with instructions that it only be given to you after you had spent time with the children and decided whether or not you wanted to be part of their lives." With shaking hands, Marcus opened the letter and began to read aloud. "My dear son, if you are reading this, it means you have stayed long enough to meet your children and perhaps even to care about them. I know you must be angry with me for keeping this secret, and you have every right to be. But I want you to understand why I made the choices I did. When Rosa told me she was pregnant, my first instinct was to contact you immediately. But you had just gotten engaged to that banker's daughter, and your business was at a crucial stage. I convinced myself that the scandal would destroy everything you had worked for. But the truth is, I was also afraid. Afraid that if you knew about the babies, you would come home out of duty rather than love. Afraid that you would resent Rosa and the children for complicating your life. Afraid that history would repeat itself and you would become the same kind of distant, emotionally unavailable father that I had been to you. So I made a decision that I now realize was wrong. I decided to raise your children myself, to give them all the love and attention I had failed to give you. I told myself I was protecting everyone, but really I was just a selfish old man who wanted a second chance at being a good father. Diego and Daniel are remarkable children, Marcus. They are smart and kind and full of life. They have your curiosity and Rosa's compassion. They ask about you constantly, even though they don't fully understand who you are to them. Rosa is an extraordinary woman. She could have demanded money or threatened scandal, but instead she has loved your children as if they were her own biological sons. She has been patient with an interfering old man, and she has created a home full of warmth and laughter in a house that was once cold and formal. If you have decided to stay and be a real father to Diego and Daniel, I am proud of you. If you have decided to leave and return to your old life, I understand. But I hope you will at least ensure that Rosa and the children are provided for. The trust funds I have established are my attempt to make amends for the chaos I have caused. But money cannot undo the years I stole from you with your children, or the burden I placed on Rosa's shoulders. I hope someday you can forgive me. More importantly, I hope you can build the family I was too scared and stubborn to help create while I was alive. With love and regret. Your father." Marcus finished reading with tears streaming down his face. Rosa was crying too, and even Mr. Harrison looked emotional. "There's one more thing," the lawyer said quietly. "Your father also left a provision in his will that if you choose to stay and raise the children, the entire estate becomes yours immediately. But if you leave, everything goes into trust for Diego and Daniel, with Rosa as the trustee." Marcus looked around the lawyer's office, then at Rosa's face, and realized that his father had planned one final manipulation. But this time it was a manipulation he could appreciate. He was still trying to control the outcome, even after death, Marcus said with a mixture of sadness and admiration. But he was trying to control it in favor of his grandchildren, Rosa pointed out. That's not the same thing as the selfishness he described in the letter. That evening, Marcus found himself sitting in his father's study, looking through more photo albums and letters. Rosa had put the boys to bed and joined him, curling up in the old leather chair by the window. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I'm thinking about forgiveness," Marcus replied. "My father and I had a complicated relationship, but reading that letter made me realize that he loved Diego and Daniel deeply, and he clearly respected you tremendously. He was a good grandfather to them," Rosa admitted, strict sometimes but always loving. "He used to read them stories in English to help them learn the language better. Rosa, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. Okay, now that you have financial security from the trust fund, you don't need me. You and the boys could live very comfortably without any help from me. So I need to know, do you want me to stay because it's what's best for Diego and Daniel, or do you want me to stay because you actually want me here?" Rosa was quiet for a long moment, then she moved from her chair to sit beside him on the couch. "Marcus, when I was 19 and pregnant and terrified, I used to dream about you coming back and sweeping me off my feet like in a fairy tale. But I'm 28 now, and I've learned that real love isn't about dramatic gestures or fairy tale endings. Then what is it about? It's about choosing each other every day. It's about building something together slowly and carefully. It's about being partners in the hard work of raising children and creating a home." She took his hand in hers. I want you to stay because I think we could build something beautiful together. Not just for the boys, but for us. But only if you're staying because you genuinely want this life, not because you feel obligated or guilty." Marcus brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Rosa, I want this life more than I've ever wanted anything. I want to wake up every morning and help you make breakfast for our children. I want to teach Diego and Daniel how to throw a baseball and help them with their homework. I want to grow old with you in this house where our family began." "Our family," Rosa repeated softly. "Our family," Marcus confirmed. As they sat together in the quiet study, surrounded by photos of the children they both loved, Marcus realized that his father's final gift hadn't been the money or the estate. It had been the chance for Marcus to discover what really mattered in life, and the wisdom to choose love over everything else. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same garden where he had first met his children, but everything had changed. The playground had been expanded with new swings and a treehouse that he and the boys had built together over several weekends. Rosa's vegetable garden had grown into a small farm that supplied the local farmers' market. And the house itself felt truly alive for the first time in Marcus's memory. "Papa, come push me higher," Diego called from the swing set, his legs pumping as he tried to reach the clouds. "Me too," Daniel added, though he was content with much gentler pushes than his adventurous brother. Marcus had learned that while the twins were identical in appearance, their personalities were wonderfully different. Diego was bold and outgoing, always ready for the next adventure. Daniel was thoughtful and gentle, preferring quiet activities like reading and drawing. Both boys had adapted to having a father with remarkable ease, as if they had simply been waiting for him to find his way home. The transition hadn't been without challenges. There had been difficult conversations about boundaries and discipline, moments when Marcus felt overwhelmed by the responsibility, and times when Rosa had to remind him that parenting was a marathon, not a sprint. But through it all, they had learned to function as a real family unit. Marcus's business had adapted better than expected to his new lifestyle. His satellite office in town employed 12 people and had become a source of pride for the community. He still traveled to New York twice a month, but now these trips felt like necessary interruptions rather than escapes from his real life. "Marcus, dinner in 10 minutes, Rosa called from the kitchen window. "Did you hear that, boys? Time to wash up. 5 more minutes?" Diego pleaded. "Mama Rosa said 10 minutes until dinner, which means 5 minutes until we need to go inside," Marcus replied, having learned that successful parenting often involved creative negotiations. As the boys ran toward the house, Marcus noticed a car pulling up the driveway. He recognized the driver immediately. It was Maria Santos, Rosa's younger sister, who had arrived from Honduras the week before. Rosa had been overwhelmed with joy when Maria had finally received her visa to visit the United States. The sisters hadn't seen each other in over 5 years, and Maria's presence had brought an additional layer of happiness to their already full house. "Tio Marcus," Maria called out as she got out of the car. She had quickly adopted the boys' habit of calling him uncle, even though she knew he was their father. "I have news." Marcus walked over to meet her, curious about her excitement. "Good news, I hope?" "The best news. I got accepted to the university here. I can stay and study nursing just like I always dreamed." Marcus felt a surge of pride and happiness. Over the past few months, he had been quietly working with an immigration lawyer to help Maria apply for a student visa. Rosa didn't know about his involvement, and he preferred to keep it that way. "That's wonderful, Maria. Rosa is going to be so excited." "She's going to cry," Maria laughed. "She always cries when she's happy." They walked into the house together where the smell of Rosa's cooking filled the air. She had been experimenting with fusion cuisine, combining traditional Honduran recipes with American ingredients, and the results were always delicious. "Rosa, your sister has news," Marcus announced as they entered the kitchen. The celebration that followed was everything Marcus had come to love about his new life. Rosa did indeed cry with happiness. The boys demanded to know what university meant and whether it had playgrounds, and Mrs. Chen emerged from wherever she had been working to add her congratulations. As they sat around the dinner table that evening, Marcus looked at the faces surrounding him and felt a contentment he had never imagined possible. Diego was telling an elaborate story about a dragon he had seen in the clouds. Daniel was quietly helping Maria learn English by correcting her pronunciation with the patience of a natural teacher. Rosa was laughing at something Mrs. Chen had whispered to her. This was his family. Loud, chaotic, multilingual, and absolutely perfect. After dinner, while Rosa and Maria caught up on family news and the boys played with their toys, Marcus stepped outside to make a phone call he had been putting off for weeks. "Jonathan, it's Marcus Wellington." "Marcus, how are things going with the estate? Ready to get back to civilization yet?" Jonathan Pierce had been Marcus's business partner and closest friend for over a decade. He had been skeptical about Marcus's decision to relocate permanently, predicting that small-town life would bore him within a month. "Actually, Jonathan, I'm calling to let you know that I'm making some changes to our partnership agreement." "What kind of changes?" "I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations permanently. I want to transfer my shares to you and Michael, and I'll remain as a consultant on major decisions." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that Marcus wondered if the call had been dropped. "Marcus, are you having some kind of breakdown? This business is your life." "No, Jonathan. This business was my life. Now I have a real life, with people who matter more to me than profit margins and board meetings." "You're talking about the maid and those kids." Marcus felt a flash of anger at the dismissive tone. "I'm talking about my family. Rosa is not the maid. She's an incredible woman who has been raising my children, and those kids are my sons. Marcus, think about what you're giving up. We're talking about millions of dollars, prestige, influence, and I'm talking about bedtime stories, scraped knees, family dinners, and waking up every morning with people who love me for who I am, not what I can do for them." After he hung up, Marcus sat on the porch steps and thought about the conversation. A year ago, he would have agreed with Jonathan. He would have seen his current life as a step backward, a surrender of everything he had worked to achieve. But now he understood the difference between success and fulfillment. Success was about accumulating achievements and recognition. Fulfillment was about building something meaningful with people you loved. "Papa," Daniel's voice interrupted his thoughts. The little boy had appeared beside him in his pajamas. "Mama Rosa says it's story time." "Coming, buddy." As they walked into the house together, Daniel slipped his small hand into Marcus's larger one. "Papa, are you happy here with us?" "I'm happier than I've ever been in my whole life," Marcus replied honestly. "Good, because we love you very much, and we want you to stay forever." "Forever sounds perfect to me." That night, after the boys were asleep and Maria had gone to her room to call friends back home with her exciting news, Marcus and Rosa sat on their porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the garden. "Maria told me about the immigration lawyer you hired," Rosa said quietly. Marcus smiled. "I was wondering when you'd figure that out. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you would have tried to talk me out of it, and because families take care of each other. Maria is your family, which makes her my family too." Rosa curled up against his side. "Have I mentioned lately that I love you?" "Not in the last few hours," Marcus replied, kissing the top of her head. "Well, I do. I love the man you've become, and I love the father you are to our boys." "Our boys," Marcus repeated, never getting tired of those words. As they sat together in comfortable silence, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. A year ago, he had been a successful but lonely man whose greatest achievements were measured in dollars and deals. Tonight, he was surrounded by love, laughter, and the kind of wealth that couldn't be quantified on any balance sheet. His father's secret had been devastating at first, but it had also been the greatest gift imaginable. It had brought him home to a family he never knew he wanted, and a life he never knew he needed. The billionaire's unexpected homecoming had indeed revealed a harsh secret, but it had also revealed something far more precious, the truth about what really mattered in life. And as Marcus held Rosa close while their children slept safely inside the house that had finally become a true home, he knew that he was the richest man in the world.